Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the marble-columned world of ancient Rome, where seduction wasn't just an art. It was a full-contact sport played with scrolls of poetry instead of swords. You're walking through the Forum Romanum at twilight, watching as toga-clad men clutch papyrus rolls like modern guys clutch their phones, rehearsing verses that could make or break their romantic conquests. The air smells of olive oil, wine, and desperation as you witness a civilization that turned foreplay into performance art. You probably won't survive the sheer audacity of what passes for smooth talk in 50 BCE. Imagine trying to seduce someone today by reciting a 200-line epic about their eyebrows. Yet somehow, it worked. Roman men spent more time crafting the perfect couplet than most people today spend writing their entire dating profiles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing this global community we've built together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're witnessing the birth of literary seduction, where Roman poets discovered that the pen truly was mightier than the sword, at least when it came to getting someone into bed. Picture yourself in a wealthy Roman's villa, scrolls scattered across marble tables like abandoned love letters, each one a carefully crafted missile of desire aimed at melting hearts and loosening toga strings. The Romans didn't just stumble into poetry as foreplay, they weaponized it. You watch as young men from aristocratic families spend hours with Greek tutors, not learning mathematics or philosophy, but mastering the delicate art of metric seduction. They memorize the works of earlier poets, then twist those classical forms into personal advertisements for their own romantic prowess. These weren't your typical roses are red offerings. Roman erotic poetry operated on multiple levels simultaneously. You had to demonstrate your education, your wit, your emotional depth, and your sexual intentions, all while maintaining perfect meter and avoiding any lines that might get you exiled. It was like playing chess while juggling flaming torches on a tightrope. The setting matters crucially here. You're not dealing with private text messages or secret notes passed in hallways. Roman poetry recitations were often semi-public affairs, performed at dinner parties where your romantic target sat alongside friends, family members, and social rivals. Imagine trying to seduce someone while their mother-in-law sits 3 feet away, critiquing both your poetic technique and your matrimonial prospects. The pressure was enormous. A poorly crafted verse could end not just your romantic hopes, but your entire social standing. Roman society was built on reputation, and a man who couldn't string together an elegant couplet about his beloved's ankles was considered barely civilized. You watch as hopeful suitors pace their gardens at dawn, mumbling half-finished poems to marble statues, desperate to perfect their delivery before the evening's crucial performance. Historians still argue whether these poetic seductions were genuine expressions of passion or elaborate social theatre. The line between authentic desire and performative courtship blurred beyond recognition in a culture where everything, from politics to religion to romance, was conducted through ritual and spectacle. What made Roman poetic foreplay particularly devious was its intellectual demands on the target. The recipient couldn't simply blush and giggle. They were expected to appreciate the literary craftsmanship, recognize the classical allusions, and respond with their own witty commentary. Seduction became a collaborative intellectual exercise where both parties had to prove their cultural sophistication while dancing around their mutual attraction. You realize that Roman men weren't just trying to impress women with their poetry. They were creating an entire ecosystem of desire where words became foreplay, anticipation became arousal, and the journey toward physical intimacy was as important as the destination itself. You're standing in a dusty bookshop in 60 BCE Rome, watching as a young aristocrat named Gaius Valerius Catullus revolutionizes the art of getting laid through literature. He's hunched over a wax tablet, frantically scribbling verses that will change how Romans think about desire forever. The elegiac tradition is being born right before your eyes, and it's messier than you'd expect from something so historically significant. Catullus didn't set out to invent erotic poetry as we know it. He was just desperately horny for a woman named Lesbia, probably Clodia Metelli, a politician's wife, who collected poets like some people collect shoes. You watch him craft verses that swing wildly between tender devotion and bitter rage, creating a template that every love-struck Roman will follow for the next 3 centuries. The elegiac couplet becomes the golden standard for seductive verse, alternating lines of dactylic hexameter and pentameter that create a rhythmic push and pull perfectly suited to the emotional rollercoaster of Roman romance. It's like the ancient equivalent of a slow dance, where the meter itself mimics the ebb and flow of sexual tension. You witness the birth of what scholars now call subjective love elegy, where poets abandon the grand mythological themes of epic poetry to focus obsessively on their own romantic disasters. Instead of singing about heroes conquering cities, they're writing about conquering hearts, or more often, failing spectacularly at basic human connection while producing gorgeous poetry about their failures. The Roman elegiac poets develop a whole vocabulary of seduction that becomes standard equipment for any self-respecting lover. You hear them coining phrases that will echo through centuries. Amor omnia vincit, love conquers all. Descriptions of lovers as domina, mistress goddess, and elaborate metaphors comparing romantic pursuit to military campaigns or religious devotion. Propertius takes the stage next, perfecting the art of erotic autobiography disguised as universal truth. You watch him perform at intimate gatherings, transforming his relationship with a courtesan named Cynthia into epic poetry that makes every listener feel like they're eavesdropping on the most passionate affair in Roman history. His verses are so sexually charged that conservative senators occasionally call for his books to be banned from public libraries. The elegists create something unprecedented. Poetry that's explicitly designed to turn readers on while simultaneously showing off the poet's intellectual credentials. You realise they've figured out how to make education sexy, transforming classical allusions and mythological references into elaborate innuendos that only the culturally sophisticated can fully appreciate. Tibullus adds his own twist to the tradition, specialising in pastoral fantasies where lovers escape the corruption of urban Rome for idealised countryside retreats. His poems read like ancient vacation brochures written by someone whose primary concern is finding the perfect spot for outdoor romance. You can practically smell the olive groves and hear the babbling brooks he describes as backdrops for various forms of physical affection. These poets don't just write about sex. They theorize about it, creating elaborate philosophical frameworks for understanding desire, jealousy, and romantic obsession. You watch them develop concepts that psychologists won't formally recognize for another 2,000 years, analyzing the psychology of attraction with the same rigor that other Romans applied to military strategy or architectural engineering. The elegiac tradition creates its own social ecosystem. Young Romans begin hosting poetry circles that function as sophisticated dating services, where eligible bachelors and bachelorettes gather to share verses and size up potential romantic partners. It's like ancient speed dating, except everyone has to demonstrate their literary prowess before anyone gets to first base. Historians still argue whether the elegiac poets were describing real relationships or creating fictional personas for dramatic effect. The line between autobiography and performance art was deliberately blurred, allowing poets to explore taboo subjects while maintaining plausible deniability about their personal lives. What makes the elegiac tradition particularly brilliant as foreplay is its built-in delay mechanism. These poems are designed to be savoured slowly, with layers of meaning that reward multiple readings and careful analysis. You realise that Roman lovers weren't just exchanging verses, they were creating elaborate intellectual puzzles that kept their targets thinking about them long after the initial recitation ended. The elegiac poets essentially invented the concept of literary seduction as an art form worthy of serious cultural attention, transforming private sexual desire into public artistic achievement that could launch careers and establish reputations that lasted centuries. You're sitting in Ovid's study in 2 CE, watching the master himself put the finishing touches on what will become history's most influential dating manual. The Ars Amatoria isn't just poetry, It's a 3-book tactical guide that reads like The Game, written by someone who actually understood both literature and human psychology. Ovid is essentially creating the world's first pick-up artist handbook, except his advice actually works, and doesn't make you sound like a sociopath. The genius of Ovid's approach is that he treats seduction like any other skill worth mastering, requiring study, practice, and strategic thinking. You watch him organize his manual into logical sections: where to find potential partners, how to win them over, and how to keep them interested. It's methodical without being mechanical, playful without being manipulative. Book 1 focuses on hunting grounds, and Ovid's suggestions would make a modern dating app developer weep with envy. He recommends theatres, where shared cultural experiences create natural conversation starters, porticos, where you can accidentally encounter the same person repeatedly, religious festivals where heightened emotions make everyone more receptive to romantic advances, and the circus, where the excitement of chariot races gets everyone's blood pumping in helpful directions. You realise Ovid has essentially mapped the psychology of attraction onto the geography of Rome itself. He understands that context matters enormously in romantic encounters. The same person who ignores you at the forum might be charmed by your wit at a wine festival. He's teaching Romans to think strategically about timing and location, turning the entire city into their dating playground. His advice about conversation starters feels surprisingly modern. Ovid suggests asking about the horses at the races, commenting on the actors in a play, or inquiring about religious rituals. Basically, find something you're both experiencing and use it as a bridge to more personal topics. He's figured out that successful seduction begins with successful conversation, and successful conversation begins with genuine shared interest in something outside yourselves. Book 2 gets into the actual mechanics of winning someone over, and here Ovid reveals his true genius. He advises men to be genuinely helpful rather than just impressive. Carry her packages, help her find a good seat, protect her from crowds. You watch him demolish the aggressive masculine posturing that less sophisticated Romans mistake for attractiveness, replacing it with thoughtful attention to his target's actual needs and comfort. Ovid's poetry instructions are particularly sophisticated. He doesn't just tell men to write verses, he explains how to tailor poetic style to individual personalities. Serious women appreciate learned references and complex meters. Playful women prefer lighter, more accessible verses. Proud women respond to elaborate praise of their beauty and intelligence. He's essentially creating personalized seduction algorithms 2 millennia before anyone knew what an algorithm was. The master poet also addresses practical concerns that other romantic advisors ignore completely. He discusses grooming standards, warning men against excessive perfume or overly elaborate hairstyles that might suggest they're trying too hard. He recommends physical fitness not for its own sake, but because confidence and energy are naturally attractive qualities. You realize he's teaching Romans to become genuinely more appealing people rather than just better performers. Book 3, addressed to women, caused enormous controversy by acknowledging that women might actually want to participate actively in romantic pursuits, rather than simply being passive targets. Ovid provides women with their own strategic advice for attracting and keeping male attention, treating female desire as legitimate and worth cultivating, rather than something to be suppressed or ignored. His discussion of timing reveals a sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation, but the gentle, mutually beneficial kind. Ovid explains when to be available and when to create scarcity, how to use jealousy constructively without causing genuine harm, and how to maintain mystery while still providing enough encouragement to keep suitors engaged. Historians still argue whether Ovid intended the ars amatoria as serious instruction or elaborate parody of Roman social conventions. The tone is playful enough to suggest satire, but the advice is practical enough to suggest genuine experience with successful seduction. What makes Ovid's manual particularly brilliant as foreplay instruction is his emphasis on process over outcome. He teaches Romans to enjoy the pursuit itself, turning courtship into an elaborate game where both parties can demonstrate their wit, creativity, and cultural sophistication. The journey becomes as rewarding as the destination, creating relationships built on mutual appreciation rather than just physical attraction. you realise that Ovid has essentially invented the concept of seduction as collaborative art form, where both participants work together to create increasingly elaborate and satisfying romantic experiences. You're wandering through the elaborate gardens of a Roman villa at dusk, watching as wealthy Romans transform their living spaces into stages for romantic theatre. These aren't just places to live, they're carefully designed seduction environments, where every fountain, every statue, every strategically placed couch serves the ultimate goal of creating perfect conditions for intimate encounters. The Roman Domus becomes a masterclass in architectural foreplay. You notice how the entry sequence alone is designed to build anticipation. Visitors pass through multiple rooms of increasing luxury and privacy, each space more beautiful than the last, creating a psychological journey that mirrors the emotional progression of seduction itself. By the time you reach the inner garden or private dining room, you're already primed for intimacy just by moving through the space. Gardens receive special attention as romantic venues because they combine natural beauty with controlled environments. Roman landscape architects plant specific flowers and herbs, not just for their appearance, but for their alleged aphrodisiac properties. Roses for passion, mint for stimulation, myrtle for fertility. You're basically walking through an ancient pharmaceutical garden disguised as aesthetic decoration, where every plant has been chosen for its ability to enhance romantic mood. The famous Roman baths deserve their reputation as seduction central, but not for the reasons you might expect. You discover that the elaborate bathing rituals create natural opportunities for extended conversation, shared experiences, and gradual physical intimacy without the pressure of explicitly sexual contexts. Romans essentially invented the perfect first date location, somewhere you can spend hours getting to know someone while everyone gets progressively more relaxed and underdressed. Private dining rooms represent the pinnacle of Roman seduction architecture. You observe how these spaces are designed for maximum intimacy. Low couches arranged to encourage close conversation, dim lighting that flatters everyone's appearance, and acoustics that allow whispered secrets while maintaining privacy from servants and other household members. The room itself becomes a collaborator in the seduction process. Romans developed the concept of the symposium as formalized romantic entertainment, borrowing from Greek traditions but adding their own sophistication. These aren't just dinner parties, they're elaborate social rituals where food, wine, poetry, and music combine to create controlled environments for romantic connections. You watch as hosts carefully orchestrate guest lists and seating arrangements to maximize the possibility of successful romantic pairings. The role of servants in creating romantic spaces reveals the complex social dynamics of Roman seduction. You realize that wealthy Romans essentially employ entire teams of people whose job is to facilitate their masters' love lives, slaves who understand exactly when to appear with fresh wine and when to disappear discreetly, who know how to maintain perfect lighting and temperature conditions, who can provide background music without becoming intrusive. Water features receive special attention as romantic accessories. Roman engineers designed fountains not just for their visual appeal, but for their acoustic properties. The sound of flowing water masks private conversations while creating a soothing background ambiance that encourages relaxation and intimacy. You're witnessing the ancient origins of the white noise machine, except these versions are made of marble and decorated with erotic sculptures. The famous Roman villa frescoes serve as more than just decoration. They're conversation starters and mood setters, designed to introduce sexual themes into social spaces without being explicitly pornographic. You observe how these artistic choices create environments where discussing passion and desire feels natural and culturally appropriate rather than shocking or taboo. Romans also master the art of seasonal romantic spaces, transforming the same locations for different times of year. Summer brings outdoor dining areas with elaborate awnings and cooling systems. Winter features intimate indoor spaces with sophisticated heating and warm lighting. The wealthy literally architect their romantic lives around creating optimal conditions for seduction, regardless of weather or season. Historians still argue whether Roman domestic architecture was primarily designed for family life or romantic entertainment, but the evidence suggests that successful Romans saw these purposes as complementary rather than competing. A house that facilitated good romantic connections also strengthened family alliances and social networks. The attention to sensory details reveals Roman understanding of environmental psychology centuries before anyone gave it a name. You notice how textures, scents, sounds, and visual elements are all carefully coordinated to create spaces that feel luxurious and intimate without being overwhelming or distracting from the human connections they're meant to facilitate. What makes Roman romantic spaces particularly sophisticated is their flexibility. The same garden that hosts a large social gathering during the day can be transformed into an intimate private retreat in the evening, simply by adjusting lighting, furniture arrangement, and servant presence. You're observing a masterclass in psychological warfare disguised as romance, watching as Romans elevate sexual tension to an art form that would make modern dating coaches weep with admiration. The concept of instant gratification is completely foreign here. These people have turned waiting into a weapon of mass seduction, understanding that anticipation can be more intoxicating than actual physical contact. Roman courtship operates on what you might call the slow burn principle, where the entire process is designed to build desire through carefully orchestrated delays and strategic withholding. You watch as experienced lovers time their encounters like military campaigns, knowing exactly when to advance and when to retreat to maintain maximum psychological impact on their targets. The poetry recitation schedule becomes a perfect example of this calculated delay. Rather than delivering all their best verses in one overwhelming performance, smart Romans parcel out their literary ammunition over weeks or months. Tonight, you get a tantalizing sample that hints at deeper emotions. Next week brings a slightly more personal revelation. The week after that features verses that acknowledge growing intimacy without quite declaring outright passion. You discover that Roman lovers develop elaborate systems of gift escalation that mirror this same psychological strategy. The progression might begin with a simple flower or piece of fruit, something that could be dismissed as mere politeness if rejected. Success leads to a book of poetry, then perhaps a piece of jewellery, then items that require increasingly personal knowledge of the recipient's tastes and preferences. Each gift tests the waters while providing plausible deniability if the romantic interest isn't reciprocated. The Roman calendar itself becomes a tool for orchestrated anticipation. Religious festivals, seasonal celebrations, and social events provide natural deadlines and milestones that lovers use to structure their courtship timelines. You realize they're essentially gamifying romance, creating achievement levels and progress markers that make the pursuit feel like an engaging challenge rather than potentially embarrassing rejection. Physical proximity gets carefully rationed according to sophisticated unwritten rules. Roman social customs provide numerous opportunities for accidental contact, helping someone onto a couch, steadying them on stairs, adjusting a cloak against evening chill. But successful seducers understand that overusing these opportunities dilutes their impact. The goal is to leave the target wanting more contact, not feeling overwhelmed by unwanted touching. Conversation topics follow similar strategic progressions. Early interactions focus on safe public subjects, current events, mutual acquaintances, cultural happenings. Gradually, as trust builds, conversations become more personal, revealing increasingly intimate details about hopes, fears, and desires. You watch as skilled Romans conduct these verbal dance sequences with the precision of choreographers, knowing exactly how much personal revelation is appropriate at each stage. The practice of literary courtship reveals Roman mastery of delayed gratification through intellectual stimulation. Lovers exchange increasingly complex and elusive poems that reward careful study and rereading. A single verse might contain multiple layers of meaning that unfold over days or weeks of contemplation, keeping the recipient mentally engaged with the sender even when they're physically apart. Romans developed the concept of romantic seasonality, understanding that different times of year create different emotional atmospheres that can be exploited for maximum seductive effect. Spring awakens desires that have been dormant through winter. Summer heat makes everyone more physically aware. Autumn's melancholy creates opportunities for comfort and emotional bonding. Winter's enforced indoor proximity allows for intimate conversations impossible during busier seasons. The role of mutual friends becomes crucial in orchestrating these extended seductions. You observe how Romans use their social networks to create accidental encounters, ensure their romantic interest hears flattering reports about them, and provide third-party validation of their character and prospects. It's like having a team of unpaid publicists working to enhance your romantic reputation. Historians still argue whether Roman delayed gratification techniques were conscious strategy or simply the natural result of complex social conventions. But the evidence suggests that successful Romans understood the psychology of desire well enough to manipulate it deliberately. The physical architecture of Roman social life supports these delay tactics perfectly. Houses designed with multiple semi-private spaces allow couples to gradually increase their intimacy over successive encounters, from public rooms to garden alcoves to private studies, creating a natural progression that feels organic rather than calculated. What makes Roman delayed gratification particularly sophisticated is its emphasis on building genuine emotional connection alongside physical desire. You realize they're not just teasing their targets sexually, they're creating relationships with enough intellectual and emotional depth to sustain long-term interest beyond the initial conquest. You're navigating the intricate social minefield of Roman class distinctions, where your romantic strategies depend entirely on whether you're pursuing a senator's daughter, a wealthy freedwoman, or a fellow aristocrat's wife. The Romans have created a sexual hierarchy so complex it makes modern dating apps look like child's games. And getting the rules wrong doesn't just mean romantic failure, it can mean social exile or worse. At the top of the pyramid sit the aristocratic wives and daughters, protected by layers of social convention that make approaching them feel like infiltrating a fortress. You watch as young men from senatorial families spend months orchestrating elaborate social maneuvers just to have legitimate excuses for conversation. These women can't be pursued directly. Instead, you have to demonstrate your worthiness through public achievements, family connections, and displays of cultural sophistication that prove you belong in their social circle. The rules governing senatorial courtship read like diplomatic protocols. Every interaction must be witnessed by appropriate chaperones. Every gift must be valuable enough to show serious intent, but not so extravagant as to suggest improper motivations. Every poem must demonstrate classical education while avoiding anything that might be construed as sexually explicit. You're essentially conducting international negotiations disguised as romance. Freed women occupy a fascinating middle ground in the Roman romantic ecosystem. Having gained their liberty through manumission, they possess legal rights that slaves lack, but still carry the social stigma of their former status. This creates unique opportunities for men who can't access aristocratic women, but want partners with intelligence, education, and financial independence. You observe how relationships with freed women often involve more genuine equality and mutual respect than the heavily scripted interactions of the upper classes. The courtship of freed women reveals Roman social mobility in action. These women have often accumulated wealth and property through business ventures or patronage relationships, making them attractive partners for ambitious men seeking financial advancement alongside romantic fulfillment. The seduction strategies here focus more on demonstrating long-term potential and genuine affection, rather than just displaying inherited status and cultural credentials. Slaves present the most complicated and morally troubling aspect of Roman sexual culture. The complete lack of legal consent protections means that relationships between free Romans and enslaved people operate outside normal courtship conventions entirely. Yet you discover that some Roman masters develop genuine emotional attachments to intelligent, educated slaves, creating complex situations where real affection exists alongside fundamental power imbalances that make modern observers deeply uncomfortable. The infamous Roman fascination with actresses and prostitutes reflects their desire to escape the rigid social conventions governing relationships with respectable women. These professional entertainers offer intellectual stimulation and sexual experience, without the family obligations and social complications that come with pursuing marriage-eligible partners. You watch as prominent Romans conduct elaborate public courtships with famous courtesans, treating these relationships as acceptable outlets for romantic passion that can't be expressed within conventional social boundaries. Regional variations add another layer of complexity to Roman class-based seduction. A strategy that works perfectly in cosmopolitan Rome might be completely inappropriate in conservative provincial towns, where local aristocrats maintain stricter traditional standards. You realize that successful Romans essentially need to master multiple romantic dialects, depending on where they're operating and whom they're pursuing. The role of family approval varies dramatically across class lines. Aristocratic marriages require elaborate negotiations between fathers who view romantic partnerships as political and economic alliances first, and personal relationships second. Lower-class Romans enjoy much more freedom to choose their own partners, but they also lack the resources to support extended courtship rituals that wealthy families take for granted. Economic considerations shape romantic strategies in ways that modern dating culture largely ignores. You observe how Romans openly discuss their financial prospects and inheritance expectations as part of normal courtship conversation. Being coy about money is considered naive rather than romantic. Everyone understands that successful relationships require adequate resources to maintain appropriate social standards. Historians still argue whether Roman class-based romantic restrictions strengthened or weakened the institution of marriage, but the evidence suggests that different social levels developed relationship patterns suited to their particular circumstances and constraints. The concept of appropriate ambition governs much of Roman romantic strategy. Pursuing someone slightly above your current social status demonstrates admirable drive. Aiming too high suggests dangerous delusions that could damage your reputation. Settling too low implies either lack of ambition or hidden personal defects that make you unworthy of better options. What makes Roman class-based courtship particularly sophisticated is its recognition that different social levels require entirely different skill sets and strategies, forcing successful Romans to become accomplished social anthropologists who can adapt their approach to their target's specific cultural context and expectations. You're witnessing a revolution in gender dynamics that would make modern feminists proud, watching as Roman women refuse to play passive victims in the game of seduction and instead become masters of romantic manipulation themselves. Forget everything you think you know about ancient women being powerless. Roman ladies from wealthy families wielded erotic authority like seasoned generals commanding armies of devoted admirers. The Roman matrona represents a completely different model of female power than what most ancient cultures produced. You observe women like Claudia Metelli, Catullus's infamous Lesbia, orchestrating elaborate romantic dramas involving multiple simultaneous suitors, playing them against each other with the calculating precision of a chess grandmaster. These aren't helpless damsels waiting for rescue. They're apex predators disguised as delicate flowers. Roman women develop their own sophisticated poetry traditions, often surpassing their male counterparts in wit and verbal dexterity. You watch as they compose verses that simultaneously encourage and discourage suitors, creating literary puzzles that keep men obsessively analyzing every word for hidden meanings. They understand that intellectual superiority can be the most potent aphrodisiac of all, especially when wielded by someone society expects to be decoratively silent. The power of the Roman hostess reveals female agency in its most refined form. Wealthy women control the social environments where romantic connections happen, deciding guest lists, seating arrangements, and entertainment programs that can make or break courtship attempts. You realize that Roman dinner parties function as elaborate dating services run by women who understand exactly how to orchestrate romantic chemistry between carefully selected participants. Letter writing becomes a particularly feminine art form that allows Roman women to conduct extended intellectual seductions without violating social conventions about appropriate behavior. Through correspondence, they can reveal wit, education, and personality while maintaining physical distance that preserves their reputations. You watch as some women conduct multiple simultaneous epistolary relationships, keeping various suitors engaged through carefully crafted written performances. The Roman woman's toilet ritual, that elaborate daily process of bathing, cosmetics and dressing, functions as psychological preparation for romantic warfare. You observe how wealthy women employ teams of slave specialists who understand that physical beauty is just the foundation for more complex forms of attraction. The goal isn't just to look appealing, but to project confidence, sophistication, and sexual authority that can dominate any social situation. Roman women master the art of strategic visibility, understanding exactly when and where to appear for maximum romantic impact. They time their appearances at public events, religious festivals, and social gatherings with the precision of military operations, knowing that scarcity increases desirability, while excessive availability suggests desperation. You're watching ancient social media influencers who understand personal branding centuries before anyone invented the concept. The institution of the Roman salon gives women platforms for displaying intellectual attractions that complement their physical appeal. You observe how clever hostesses create environments where they can demonstrate their knowledge of literature, philosophy, and current events while surrounded by appreciative male audiences. These gatherings function as elaborate auditions where women perform their worthiness as romantic partners through cultural sophistication rather than just physical beauty. Roman women develop sophisticated revenge strategies for dealing with unsatisfactory suitors, creating cautionary tales that keep less desirable men from wasting their time with inappropriate advances. You watch as they deploy social networks to destroy reputations, compose savage poems that publicly humiliate rejected lovers, and orchestrate elaborate practical jokes that turn persistent suitors into laughingstocks. The concept of the learned woman emerges as a particularly Roman romantic ideal, creating expectations that successful women must be able to hold their own in intellectual conversations about literature, philosophy, and politics. This isn't just about being decoratively educated. Roman men expect their romantic partners to be genuine intellectual companions capable of stimulating conversation and sophisticated cultural analysis. Female religious authority provides another avenue for romantic power, as women who serve as priestesses or participate in female-only religious cults possess social status and mysterious knowledge that many men find irresistibly attractive. You observe how some women leverage their religious roles to create auras of spiritual superiority that make them more, rather than less, sexually appealing. Historians still argue whether Roman women's romantic agency represented genuine female empowerment or just more sophisticated forms of patriarchal control, but the evidence suggests that at least some women managed to carve out significant personal autonomy within the constraints of their social system. The Roman woman's mastery of gift-giving reveals her understanding of economic seduction, knowing exactly what presents will flatter without appearing too expensive, what tokens will create obligations without seeming manipulative, and how to use material generosity to build emotional connections that serve her long-term romantic interests. What makes Roman women's seductive agency particularly impressive is their ability to operate successfully within social conventions that theoretically limited their freedom, while actually maximizing their practical power over the men who supposedly controlled them. You're stepping into a world where the gods themselves are your wingmen, watching as Romans weave religious devotion into their seduction strategies with the casual expertise of people who understand that divine approval makes everything more romantic. The Pantheon isn't just about worship, it's an elaborate support system for lovers who want supernatural assistance with their earthly romantic ambitions. Venus reigns supreme as the ultimate deity of seduction, but you discover that Roman lovers don't just pray to her, they basically treat her as a cosmic dating coach. Temples dedicated to Venus function as ancient matchmaking services, where hopeful romantics leave offerings, seek prophetic guidance about their romantic prospects, and perform rituals designed to enhance their personal attractiveness. You watch as young men sacrifice doves and roses while whispering detailed descriptions of their romantic targets, essentially filing divine customer service requests for help with specific seduction campaigns. The festival of Venus Verticordia becomes an annual celebration of sanctified horniness, where Roman women gather to ask the goddess to turn hearts in their favour and protect them from unwanted advances while encouraging desired ones. You observe elaborate ceremonies where participants bathe in rose-scented water, burn incense made from aphrodisiac herbs, and perform ritual dances that would make modern fertility clinics blush. It's like a combination religious service and romantic self-help seminar, blessed by divine authority. Cupid's role extends far beyond the cherubic arrow shooter of later traditions. Romans understand him as a serious divine force capable of inflicting both ecstatic pleasure and devastating emotional destruction. Smart lovers perform protective rituals designed to shield themselves from Cupid's more destructive impulses, while requesting his assistance in striking their targets with reciprocal passion. You realize they're essentially asking for divine help in avoiding unrequited love, while ensuring their own romantic efforts succeed. The cult of Priapus reveals Roman attitudes towards sexual performance anxiety in ways that would make modern therapy sessions seem tame. This perpetually aroused garden god receives offerings from men worried about their sexual prowess and women seeking enhanced fertility. His temples feature anatomically explicit artwork that functions as both religious iconography and practical sex education, creating sacred spaces where discussing physical intimacy feels spiritually appropriate rather than socially taboo. Roman marriage ceremonies incorporate multiple deities into elaborate blessing rituals that transform legal contracts into cosmic events. You watch as Juno oversees the spiritual aspects of marital union, while Hymen blesses the physical consummation and household gods ensure domestic harmony. The wedding night becomes a divinely sanctioned celebration where religious devotion and sexual pleasure reinforce each other rather than competing for attention. Mystery cults provide particularly intense religious experiences that create powerful bonds between participants who share secret knowledge and sacred rituals. You observe how involvement in Dionysiac or Mithraic mysteries becomes a form of spiritual foreplay, where shared religious ecstasy creates emotional intimacy that often leads to physical relationships. These cults essentially function as exclusive dating services for people seeking partners who understand that spiritual and sexual transcendence can enhance each other. The practice of dream interpretation adds a prophetic dimension to Roman courtship, as lovers seek divine guidance through their sleeping visions about romantic prospects and sexual compatibility. Priests who specialize in erotic dream analysis become essential consultants for anyone conducting serious courtship campaigns, helping interpret divine messages about timing, strategy, and partner selection. Household shrines dedicated to love deities transform private homes into sacred spaces, where romantic activities receive ongoing divine blessing. You discover that wealthy Romans maintain elaborate domestic altars, where they regularly burn incense, leave food offerings, and perform intimate rituals designed to keep their love lives under permanent divine protection. The Roman calendar provides numerous festivals and holy days that create religiously sanctioned opportunities for romantic encounters. Lupercalia becomes an annual celebration of fertility and sexual liberation. Floralia transforms the city into a garden party celebrating female sexuality. Various Venus festivals provide multiple opportunities throughout the year for lovers to seek divine intervention in their romantic affairs. Regional variations in love deity worship create fascinating cultural differences in romantic practices across the empire. You observe how Celtic love goddesses blend with Roman Venus worship in Britain, Egyptian Isis influences Italian fertility rituals, and Greek Aphrodite traditions add sophisticated philosophical dimensions to practical Roman seduction techniques. Historians still argue whether Roman religious sexuality represented genuine spiritual belief or convenient excuse for behaviours that might otherwise be socially unacceptable. But the evidence suggests that most Romans experienced their religious and romantic lives as naturally complementary rather than contradictory. The role of priestly blessing in romantic relationships reveals Roman understanding that successful long-term partnerships require more than just physical attraction and social compatibility. They need spiritual foundation that connects human love to cosmic forces larger than individual desire. What makes Roman religious seduction particularly sophisticated is its integration of divine authority with practical, romantic strategy, creating belief systems where seeking supernatural assistance with love affairs feels like responsible spiritual practice rather than frivolous magical thinking. You're entering the world of Roman entertainment as foreplay, where the line between performance and seduction dissolves into an intoxicating blend of artistic sophistication and erotic anticipation. Music and dance aren't just cultural activities here. They're elaborate mating rituals disguised as refined entertainment, where every note and movement serves the ultimate goal of romantic conquest. The private concert becomes the Roman equivalent of Netflix and chill, except infinitely more sophisticated and requiring actual musical talent. You observe wealthy Romans commissioning musicians to perform intimate serenades tailored specifically to their romantic targets' tastes and preferences. These aren't just background soundtracks. They're carefully choreographed emotional manipulation campaigns designed to create the perfect psychological atmosphere for romantic advancement. Roman dance masters develop choreographic techniques specifically designed to showcase physical attractiveness while maintaining social respectability. You watch as dancers perform routines that emphasize graceful movement, physical flexibility, and controlled sensuality without crossing into explicitly sexual territory. It's like ancient burlesque designed by philosophers who understand that suggestion is more powerful than revelation. The symposium tradition elevates musical entertainment into high art, where guests take turns performing songs, reciting poetry, and demonstrating their cultural sophistication for appreciative audiences that include their romantic interests. You realize these gatherings function as elaborate audition processes, where potential lovers showcase their talents while evaluating each other's artistic sensibilities and intellectual compatibility. Professional entertainers occupy a unique position in Roman romantic culture, serving as both performers and romantic counselors who understand the psychology of seduction better than most of their aristocratic clients. You observe how skilled musicians and dancers read their audiences with supernatural accuracy, adjusting their performances in real time to enhance the romantic chemistry between specific individuals in the room. The Roman lyre becomes the instrument of choice for intimate seduction, its gentle tones perfect for creating atmospheric background during private conversations while still allowing for spontaneous musical accompaniment to poetry recitations. You watch as young Romans practice their lyre techniques with the same dedication that others devote to sword fighting, understanding that musical competence is essential equipment for successful courtship. Dance instruction emerges as a legitimate excuse for intimate physical contact between romantic partners, providing socially acceptable opportunities for touching, close proximity, and shared physical experiences that would be inappropriate in other contexts. Dancing lessons essentially function as legalized foreplay, where couples can explore their physical compatibility while maintaining the pretense of cultural education. The role of rhythm in Roman seduction extends beyond music into the timing of entire romantic encounters. You discover that experienced lovers orchestrate their courtship campaigns like musical compositions, understanding when to accelerate the pace of their advances and when to slow down for maximum emotional impact. They're essentially conducting symphonies of desire with themselves and their targets as the primary instruments. Regional musical traditions add exotic flavors to Roman romantic entertainment, as conquered territories contribute new instruments, dance styles, and performance techniques that sophisticated Romans incorporate into their seduction arsenals. Egyptian sistrum rhythms, Celtic harp melodies, and Germanic war chants all find their way into intimate Roman entertainment, creating multicultural fusion performances that demonstrate worldly sophistication. The acoustic architecture of Roman entertainment spaces reveals sophisticated understanding of how sound affects romantic mood. You observe how villa designers position musical performance areas to take advantage of natural acoustics that enhance intimacy while providing enough privacy for personal conversation between musical selections. These spaces are engineered for seduction as much as they are for entertainment. Sacred music provides another avenue for romantic connection, as religious festivals feature elaborate musical performances that create shared emotional experiences between participants. You watch as couples bond over mutual appreciation for complex choral arrangements or instrumental virtuosity, using religious musical events as opportunities for romantic connection that feels spiritually blessed rather than socially inappropriate. The Roman fascination with exotic instruments reflects their understanding that novelty enhances romantic interest. Partners who can perform music from distant lands demonstrate both cultural sophistication and personal mystery that makes them more attractive than those limited to conventional local entertainment styles. Historians still argue whether Roman musical seduction represented genuine artistic appreciation or elaborate social theatre, but the evidence suggests that most participants experience both dimensions simultaneously, finding authentic pleasure in the music while remaining aware of its romantic utility. The concept of musical compatibility becomes a serious consideration in Roman partner selection, as couples who share similar tastes and can perform together create more satisfying long-term relationships than those whose artistic sensibilities clash despite physical attraction. What makes Roman musical foreplay particularly sophisticated is its emphasis on collaborative creativity, where both partners contribute to the entertainment rather than one simply performing for the other's passive appreciation. You realize they're creating relationships based on shared artistic expression rather than just mutual physical attraction. You're witnessing the birth of luxury gift-giving as a romantic art form, watching as Romans transform material generosity into psychological warfare so sophisticated it makes modern consumer culture look like amateur hour. These aren't just presents. They're carefully calculated investments in emotional manipulation disguised as tokens of affection, where every object carries multiple layers of meaning that reward careful analysis. The progression of Roman romantic gifts follows unwritten rules so complex they require advanced degrees in social psychology to navigate successfully. You observe how the journey begins with seemingly innocent offerings: a perfect apple, a rare flower, a beautifully bound scroll, items that could be dismissed as mere politeness if the romantic interest isn't reciprocated. Success triggers escalation to more personal and expensive gifts that demonstrate both financial resources and intimate knowledge of the recipient's preferences. Jewellery becomes the ultimate expression of Roman romantic investment, with pieces specifically designed to showcase the giver's wealth while flattering the recipient's physical beauty. You watch as lovers commission custom pieces that incorporate personal symbolism, gemstones that match eye colour, designs that reference shared experiences, inscriptions that quote private conversations. These aren't just accessories, they're wearable love letters that proclaim romantic commitment to anyone sophisticated enough to decode their meaning. The Roman fascination with exotic imports transforms gift-giving into displays of cosmopolitan sophistication that demonstrate worldly knowledge and extensive trade connections. You discover lovers exchanging silk from China, spices from India, amber from the Baltic, and precious stones from Egypt, each gift proving that their romantic devotion extends to mobilizing the entire known world in service of their beloved's pleasure. Books and scrolls occupy a special category in Roman romantic gift-giving, allowing lovers to demonstrate their intellectual compatibility while providing lasting tokens that recipients can treasure and reference repeatedly. You observe how smart gift-givers choose texts that reflect their target's interests, while subtly advancing their own romantic agendas. Love poetry that suggests deeper feelings, philosophical works that provide talking points for future conversations, or rare manuscripts that prove the giver's cultural connections. The seasonal calendar creates natural opportunities for gift-giving that Roman lovers exploit with ruthless efficiency. Saturnalia brings license for more expensive and personal presents. New Year celebrations allow for gifts that symbolize hopes for the future relationship. Religious festivals provide excuses for offerings that demonstrate shared spiritual values. You realize that Romans have essentially weaponized their holiday calendar for romantic purposes. Personalized gifts reveal Roman understanding of individual psychology in ways that would impress modern relationship counselors. You watch as successful lovers commission custom artwork, commission poems written specifically for their targets, or arrange for musical compositions that incorporate personal references known only to the intended recipient. These gifts prove that the giver has been paying attention to details that others might miss. The role of presentation in Roman gift-giving demonstrates their mastery of theatrical seduction techniques. Gifts arrive at precisely calculated moments for maximum emotional impact during social gatherings where public appreciation enhances the recipient's status, at private moments when intimate gratitude is possible, or after strategic delays that build anticipation. The timing often matters more than the actual object being given. Practical gifts disguised as romantic tokens reveal Roman sophistication in combining emotional appeal with genuine utility. You observe lovers giving beautiful oil lamps that provide practical lighting, while suggesting intimate evening activities, elegant writing materials that facilitate future correspondence, or luxurious cosmetics that enhance beauty while demonstrating intimate knowledge of personal grooming preferences. The competitive dimension of Roman gift-giving creates elaborate arms races between rival suitors who attempt to outdo each other's generosity and creativity. You watch as romantic triangles escalate into bidding wars, where the stakes keep rising until someone either wins decisively or exhausts their resources trying to match their competition's material offerings. Regional specialties add exotic flavors to Roman romantic gift-giving, as lovers demonstrate their cosmopolitan connections by presenting items that can only be obtained from specific distant locations. A jar of garum from Hispania, a piece of British wool, or a vial of perfume from Alexandria becomes more than just a gift. It's proof of the giver's extensive network and willingness to mobilize resources across the empire. The reciprocity expectations surrounding Roman gift-giving create complex social negotiations where both parties must balance expressing gratitude without appearing overly eager or creating obligations that exceed their comfort levels. You realize that successful gift exchange requires diplomatic skills worthy of international treaty negotiations. Historians still argue whether Roman material seduction represented genuine romantic expression or crude attempts to purchase sexual favors, but the evidence suggests that most participants understood the difference between gifts that enhanced existing emotional connections and those that attempted to create artificial obligations. What makes Roman gift-giving particularly sophisticated is its integration of material generosity with intellectual and emotional intimacy, creating multi-dimensional expressions of romantic interest that appeal to both practical and spiritual aspects of human attraction. You realize they've invented relationship languages that modern psychology is only beginning to understand. You're confronting the most morally complex aspect of Roman sexual culture, where the institution of slavery creates romantic scenarios that make modern observers deeply uncomfortable while revealing how power dynamics shape intimate relationships in ways that ancient Romans themselves rarely questioned. This isn't a topic you can approach with simple moral judgments. It requires understanding how people navigated human connections within systems that seem fundamentally inhumane to contemporary sensibilities. The legal reality of slave ownership means that Roman masters possess absolute authority over their slaves' bodies and sexual activities, creating relationships that exist outside normal concepts of consent and mutual choice. You observe how this fundamental power imbalance affects even seemingly affectionate relationships between masters and slaves, as the threat of punishment or sale always lurks beneath any romantic connection that might develop. Yet within these constraints, you discover surprisingly complex emotional dynamics that don't fit neat categories of exploitation or genuine affection. Some Roman masters develop what appear to be authentic feelings for intelligent, educated slaves who serve as secretaries, tutors, or household managers. These relationships often involve intellectual intimacy and emotional dependency that goes far beyond purely sexual attraction, creating situations where the more powerful party becomes genuinely attached to someone they theoretically control completely. The practice of manumission, freeing slaves, sometimes serves romantic purposes, as masters grant liberty to slaves they wish to marry or establish as permanent companions. You watch as some Romans use freedom as the ultimate romantic gesture, transforming legal ownership into voluntary partnership. These manumissions often include financial settlements that provide newly freed partners with economic independence, suggesting genuine concern for their long-term welfare rather than just temporary sexual access. Educated Greek slaves occupy a particularly complex position in Roman Romantic culture, as their superior cultural sophistication often makes them more intellectually appealing than their Roman owners, despite their legal inferiority. You observe how some wealthy Romans conduct elaborate courtships with their own slaves, creating bizarre situations where the pursuer holds absolute legal power over their romantic target, while simultaneously feeling emotionally inferior due to educational and cultural differences. The phenomenon of slave concubinage reveals how Romans attempt to formalize long-term relationships that can't result in legal marriage due to status differences. These arrangements often provide slaves with elevated household positions, better living conditions, and protection from other forms of exploitation, while giving masters steady companionship without the social complications of relationships with free women. You realize these partnerships occupy an uncomfortable middle ground between exploitation and genuine mutual benefit. Female slaves face particularly complex pressures in Roman sexual culture, as they must navigate romantic attention from masters, male slaves, and free men who visit the household, all while having virtually no legal protection against unwanted advances. Yet some manage to leverage their sexual appeal into improved circumstances, using romantic relationships to gain influence, better treatment, or eventual freedom. The training of pleasure slaves reveals Roman sexual culture at its most explicit and disturbing, as some slaves receive specialized education in music, dance, conversation, and sexual techniques specifically designed to make them more appealing companions for wealthy Romans. These educational programs create individuals who possess sophisticated cultural knowledge alongside sexual skills, blurring the lines between artistic achievement and sexual exploitation. Slave marriages, relationships between enslaved people that lacked legal recognition but often received informal household acceptance, create their own romantic dynamics that exist partially outside their master's control. You observe how these couples develop genuine emotional bonds while understanding that their relationships could be destroyed at any moment if their owners decide to sell one partner or relocate the household. The role of slave wet nurses and personal attendants in Roman family life creates intimate relationships that sometimes evolve into sexual connections, as young Roman men often experience their first romantic and sexual encounters with household slaves who have cared for them since childhood. These relationships carry additional psychological complexity due to their roots in caretaking and emotional dependency. Regional variations in slave treatment affect romantic possibilities differently across the empire, as household slavery in urban Rome operates under different social conventions than agricultural slavery in distant provinces. You discover that cosmopolitan Roman households often develop more complex emotional dynamics between masters and slaves than rural estates where relationships remain more purely exploitative. Historians still argue whether any sexual relationship between master and slave can be considered genuinely consensual given the fundamental power imbalance, but Roman sources suggest that some participants experience these connections as emotionally meaningful despite their problematic legal framework. The economic dimensions of slave sexuality reveal how Romans commodified human intimacy in ways that modern trafficking laws specifically attempt to prevent. Yet within these commercial relationships, individual personalities and preferences still created variations in treatment and emotional connection that suggest the persistence of human agency even under dehumanizing legal systems. What makes Roman slave sexuality particularly disturbing to modern sensibilities is how it normalized the complete denial of sexual autonomy, while simultaneously creating social spaces where genuine human connections could develop between people whose legal relationship was fundamentally based on ownership and control. You linger near the threshold of a modest Roman domus, the kind with tiled mosaic floors and walls whispering the secrets of decades past. The hour is late, the oil lamps flicker, and from behind a curtain you hear murmurs, not of sweet nothings, but the delicate negotiation of risk and reward. Because here, behind these walls, lies a story older than any poem, the game of seduction when the stakes are legally higher, the players more careful, and the outcomes potentially catastrophic. Married love in Rome, you quickly realise, wasn't really about love at all. Not in the way you might imagine it today, with slow dancing in the kitchen or late-night giggles. Roman marriage was more contract than connection, a union of families, wealth, and social status, sometimes sealed before the bride even lost her baby teeth. The husband, more often than not, was older, sometimes significantly so, and the emotional climate could feel, let's just say, arid. So, where did the passion go? Well, that's where things got spicy. Adulterium, the Latin term for adultery, wasn't just frowned upon, it was a full-blown crime. But like most things in ancient Rome, laws existed as much for appearance as for enforcement. Married men, especially of the upper classes, were expected to sow their oats, just not with another man's wife. That's when the daggers came out, legally or literally. Here's the twist. A married woman, however, caught stepping outside her sanctioned role. That was danger of a different flavour. She could be exiled, disowned, or even killed, with her father and husband both holding the right to punish her, no courtroom necessary. Historians still argue whether these punishments were common or more symbolic deterrents. But what's undeniable is the double standard Rome embroidered into its very laws. Now, let's take a little detour. You're not peeking into just one type of relationship. There were actually distinctions. For instance, there was concubinatus, a kind of officially unofficial relationship that allowed a man and a lower status woman, say a freed slave or courtesan, to live as lovers without the mess of dowries or marriage contracts. Foreplay in these arrangements was often more heartfelt, ironically, because the stakes were lower. No inheritance rights, no political alliances, just emotional and physical compatibility. And if you think that's enough categories, buckle in. There was also stupro, which sounds oddly like something you'd find in a bad pasta recipe, but was in fact a criminal charge for seducing unmarried freeborn women. Yes, even if they were willing, even if they wanted to hear your Catullus recitations at midnight. So how did actual married couples handle desire? Well, with subtlety mostly. If your spouse was also your social equal, your courtship might have been revived by shared readings of Ovid's Amores, a surprise trinket of Egyptian perfume, or even a cheeky recitation over wine. Foreplay here wasn't just physical, it was emotional manoeuvring. Rekindling intimacy was often more political chess than feverish passion. Roman stoicism didn't help. One senator famously bragged that he only touched his wife out of duty, once and only in darkness. Yet cracks always appeared in the polished marble. Secret notes slipped through servant hands. Rendezvous in the rear gardens. There's even record of a woman who smuggled her lover into her home disguised as a eunuch. Risky? Absolutely. But you can't spell Rome without a little drama. And then there was the imperial court, where marriage and adultery danced the most dangerous waltz. Think of Augustus himself, who famously exiled his own daughter Julia for too many romantic indiscretions. Historians still argue whether this was truly about morality or just palace politics dressed in a toga. Either way, the message was clear. Flirt, but do it carefully. But now, let's flip the coin. Adultery wasn't always about lust. It was also protest. For some Roman women, especially those trapped in political marriages, having a lover meant reclaiming power in a world that saw them as baby-making contracts. One woman, Sulpicia, even penned love poems of her own, flipping the seduction script. You picture her now, feet up, ink-stained fingers, whispering naughty lines into the ear of a man whose name never made the history books. And that brings us to the awkward truth. Foreplay in these extramarital affairs was often better, not because of forbidden fruit syndrome, but because it required actual effort. You had to plot. You had to be clever. Love letters encoded with philosophical references. Poems scratched onto wax tablets, sometimes only legible when warmed by a candle flame. Banter that was equal parts seductive and survivalist. One wrong word could mean disgrace or death. And don't forget the slaves, discreet go-betweens who risked floggings to deliver a scarf, a vial of aphrodisiac oil, or simply a whisper. It's hard to romanticize their part in the affair Yet without them, many of Rome's most scandalous flings would have fizzled out before the second stanza. As you pad quietly away from the domus, letting its drama fade into the cicada-laced night, you carry with you a strange realization. In Rome, foreplay wasn't just poetry and perfume. It was power, politics, law, and loopholes. And whether it unfolded inside marriage or out, one thing remained consistent. Everyone was performing, some for love, some for survival, and some just for the thrill of hearing their name in a scandalous poem passed around the forum. You step beyond the city gates now, away from the marble columns and gossip-slick forums of Rome itself. Out here, the empire stretches like a lover's arm across the known world, from mist-drenched Britannia to sun-bleached Alexandria. And with it, the bedroom habits, seductive arts, and foreplay customs of Rome's sprawling provinces, each one adapting, remixing, and occasionally rejecting the capital's erotic blueprint. Let's start in Egypt. You smell incense in the air. Heavy, resinous, ancient. In Roman Egypt, Hellenistic and pharaonic traditions tangled with Roman values in a seductive knot. Love spells inscribed on papyrus drifted between lovers, sometimes invoking gods, sometimes binding desires. Imagine a young man heating a clay figurine over flame, whispering the name of his beloved with hope, and maybe just a touch of petty vengeance. In Alexandria, the foreplay toolkit came with perfume poetry and a dash of magical coercion. Historians still argue whether such spells were acts of devotion, desperation, or both. And the poetry? Less restrained than you'd think. Greek-influenced Egyptians penned verses more explicit than anything Cicero would dare hear at dinner. Roman colonists living in these regions might have embraced this loosened literary style. After all, rules had a funny way of relaxing the farther you got from the Senate. Head north and things cool, both in temperature and mood. In Roman Britain, foreplay often took on a more practical tone. You imagine lovers huddled by hearthfires, fingers cold but eager. The wooden writing tablets found at Vindolanda, yes, those same Roman outposts near Hadrian's Wall, contain personal letters between soldiers and their families. Hidden among them are tiny flourishes of longing, jokes, little verbal tickles meant to warm hearts across long distances. The romance wasn't gone, just bundled up. But even in the wild, wet corners of Britannia, some Mediterranean heat seeped through. A mosaic unearthed near Londinium depicts Venus and Mars mid-flirtation, surrounded by cheeky cherubs. You picture a Roman official inviting a guest to admire it, a goblet of local mead in hand, while his lover lounges on a bear fur rug nearby. It's a different rhythm out here. Slower, perhaps, but still pulsing with intent. Then there's Gaul, modern-day France, where the local Celts had long traditions of courtship rituals involving song and symbolic gifts. Once under Roman control, they adopted Latin poetry with a flourish, but never quite gave up their homegrown sensual flair. Picture foreplay here as a hybrid dance, one part Ovid, one part tribal memory. A Romanized nobleman might recite verses beside a druidic sacred spring, hoping both gods and girls are listening. Whether his lover swoons or scoffs, that's a toss-up. But he's trying, and that's half the charm. Now fast forward to the Levant. In Judea and Syria, Roman occupation had to navigate the religious and moral codes of fiercely proud cultures. Seduction here required tact. What might be a harmless wink in Rome could start a theological debate in Jerusalem. So Romans adapted. They embraced perfume-heavy rituals, exchanged silk instead of gold, and leaned into storytelling rather than open flirtation. One dusty love letter discovered near the Dead Sea hints at a Roman soldier's attempt to seduce a local woman, not with boasts or jewellery, but with a memory. I still dream of your hands in the barley fields. That's the kind of line even Catullus might borrow. In Hispania, things were a bit earthier. Local traditions meshed with Roman customs into something deliciously robust. Archaeologists have uncovered love amulets etched with crude drawings and spicy jokes, sort of like the ancient equivalent of sending memes to someone you're flirting with. Banter was key. One inscription found in Tarragona reads, loosely translated, "I came for wine, stayed for your thighs." Classy, number effective, Possibly. Historians still debate whether these inscriptions were public jokes or private graffiti. You suspect both. In North Africa, especially Carthage and its neighbouring regions, foreplay was spectacle. Influenced by Punic and Berber traditions, romantic performances here often involved music, dance and shared food. A seduction might start with a lute performance and end with a hand-fed fig, sticky with honey. You can almost taste it now. Imagine the sand-warmed courtyard, orange blossoms in the air, and two lovers playing a slow, layered game of glance and retreat. The provinces, in short, didn't just receive Rome's romantic ideals, they personalised them. Regional variation gave Roman-style seduction colour, texture, spice. Some embraced the poetic drama, others trimmed it down to practical charm. And in many cases, the local seduction customs ended up influencing the Romans instead. Just like how taco night influences your idea of authentic after enough margaritas. But across these cultures, one constant remained: the tension between what was public and what was whispered. Whether in a steamy Egyptian bathhouse, a chilly British villa, or a Spanish vineyard under the moon, foreplay was about performance, yes, but also privacy, the right glance at the right time, the gift left accidentally, the poem etched in the margins of a household ledger, flirting with risk always. Even the languages changed. In Gaul, Latin was kissed by Celtic. In Syria, Greek and Aramaic layered over Roman phrases. One particularly charming trilingual inscription reads, "To the flower of three lands, I send my heart, my lips, and my goats," which, okay, maybe loses something in translation, but still, the effort is admirable. You sit now at the edge of the Roman world, where imperial influence starts to fade and local tradition reclaims its voice. And yet, you realise the emotional arc stays strangely familiar. That moment when desire tiptoes into longing, that careful dance between daring and decorum, that shared laugh that lasts just a bit too long, because whether under Roman rule or just near enough to catch its perfume, people still wanted the same things: to feel chosen, to feel seen, to feel warmed from within. And sometimes all it took was a bad poem, a well-timed fig, and a whispered promise that someone might just come back tomorrow. Now you tiptoe into quieter chambers, the kind lined not with silk or scandal, but scrolls. Here, amid the faint musk of parchment and old olive oil, desire is not performed but pondered. Welcome to the world of Roman doctors and philosophers, where foreplay wasn't just sensual, it was studied, charted, and occasionally misdiagnosed as a cause of sneezing. Yes, really. But first, the philosophers. Start with Plato, adopted by many Roman intellectuals despite his Greek origins. He categorized love as a ladder, ascending from lust to divine truth. A decent metaphor if you're into stairs, but slightly inconvenient when you just want to cuddle. Stoics like Seneca weren't much help either. They believed desire was a distraction at best, a moral failing at worst. You picture Seneca writing letters to his protégé about virtue, while quietly dodging eye contact with the handsome slave pouring his wine. Still, not everyone frowned at foreplay. Epicureans, those cheeky minimalists, embraced pleasure, in moderation. For them, seduction could be refined, even philosophical, a shared conversation, a knowing glance across a garden path. Pleasure wasn't the enemy, it just had to be earned without frenzy. Which is a polite way of saying yes to back rubs, no to wild bacchanals. Probably, but it was the Roman medical writers who got weird. Enter Galen, the ancient world's overachieving physician. He had thoughts, so many thoughts, about bodily fluids, anatomy, and yes, even the proper ways to encourage arousal. He believed foreplay was important for women in particular, citing that it helped warm the womb and ensure conception. Basically, he treated the female body like a slightly cranky oven that needed preheating, and Galen wasn't alone. Serranus, no giggling, was another medical mind who weighed in. His treatise on gynecology spends pages on what kinds of touches were efficient, not romantic, efficient. Picture a man with a scroll explaining that circular motions are most conducive to conception, while his partner pretends to listen and secretly composes poetry in her head. Historians still argue whether these ancient medical texts were widely used or just academic ramblings. But one thing's clear: Roman physicians took sexual readiness seriously. They even had diagrams. Not helpful diagrams, mind you, just vague anatomical sketches and labels like seat of desire or channel of warmth. The medieval scribes who later copied these must have had a field day. Now, on to aphrodisiacs. Romans were big fans of edible encouragement. Oysters, honey, pepper, and exotic herbs like silphium, now extinct perhaps from overharvesting. These weren't just foods, they were little edible promises. Want to impress your lover? Serve a honey-drenched date stuffed with pine nuts. Want to get weird? Mix wine with ashes from a castrated rooster. One Roman cookbook includes recipes that are basically just coded pickup lines, disguised as hors d'oeuvres. And yet, some of it came with caution. Philosophers warned against excessive indulgence, fearing it could damage the soul. Or worse, the kidneys. Yes, apparently kidney distress was the price of too much passion. Still, you suspect some Romans read those warnings the way you read a cookie's calorie count, with interest, but little intention of changing behaviour. Now, here's where it gets oddly tender. Despite their obsession with charts and cautionary tales, Roman thinkers sometimes stumbled into moments of real insight. They wrote of touch, not just as stimulus, but communication, that a single hand on a shoulder could say more than any poem, that the space between two people, tense, charged, expectant, was sacred. For all their rules and theories, even the most clinical Roman minds couldn't fully dissect the mystery of desire. Even Cicero, cranky old statesman that he was, once lamented in a letter that no rhetoric could explain the feeling of the beloved's breath upon the neck. A rare, soft moment for a man otherwise known for complaining about taxes and bad poetry. You linger now, in a bathhouse-turned-library, imagining a Roman couple reading scrolls aloud to one another, half mocking the philosophers, half taking notes. Warming the womb, one asks, raising an eyebrow. Circular motion, the other says with a grin. The scrolls rustle, the olive oil glistens, the lamps flicker. Because sometimes even the driest advice becomes foreplay if you say it with the right voice. And what about shame? Well, that's the other edge of this polished coin. Many medical texts frame foreplay as a tool, not a pleasure. Something to coax compliance, not connection. And yet, hidden between the lines, especially in fringe commentaries, you find hints of something more egalitarian. One physician gently recommends listening to the woman's breath as it is the truest guide. That sentence alone feels centuries ahead of its time. And now we're back to that sneezing thing. According to some Roman doctors, foreplay, or rather arousal, could stimulate the brain in odd ways. They believed the humours, bodily fluids that governed health, were stirred by desire. This could cause sneezing, headaches, or spontaneous poetry. Okay, the last one we made up. But it does explain why some Romans considered a sneeze during seduction a sign of the gods' approval. Imagine the scene. You lean in, whisper something suggestive, and your partner sneezes, and you both take it as a cosmic thumbs up. As you drift deeper into these scroll-stuffed corners of Roman life, you realise that even the ancients struggled to define what makes one person's touch electric, another's awkward. Their best minds tried to explain it with diagrams, diets, and discipline. But in the end, even they surrendered to mystery, just like you do now, eyes heavy, body still, brain somewhere between philosophy and poetry. Because while Roman thinkers tried to turn desire into a science, it always felt more like art. You exhale slowly now, winding back through the echoing corridors of everything you've seen, felt, and flirted with tonight. From marble-pillared poetry slams to silphium-scented seductions, you've traced the fingers of Roman foreplay across bedrooms, bathhouses, gardens, and scrolls. But before sleep fully claims you, there's one last flickering candle to follow, the legacy. Because Roman foreplay didn't vanish with the empire, it evolved. You feel it when a modern lover quotes Neruda with theatrical flair, not realizing they're echoing Ovid. You see it when a bouquet arrives with a handwritten note, or when a playlist becomes the new elegiac couplet. And yes, you absolutely see it when someone sends a DM at 1 a.m. that reads suspiciously like a love spell disguised as a meme. Modern dating is chaotic. Apps, emojis, ghosting, vibes. But scratch the surface, and it's ancient Rome with better lighting. Swipe left, swipe right. Catullus would have had opinions about Tinder bios. The Roman lover was, after all, an expert at self-branding, curating their words, crafting their image, all for that one breathless moment when eyes met across a crowded tablinum. Even today, poets still chase the same highs. We package desire in 280 characters. We post thirst traps like statues with ring lights. We romanticize eye contact at coffee shops like it's a divine omen. The stage has changed, but the script, it's still got Latin roots. And what about the rituals? Baths have become spas. Scented oils now come in discreet little bottles from wellness brands. The Roman dinner party's seductive pacing, starters, wine, conversation music, lives on in date nights, candlelit kitchens and long wandering walks home. You don't call it foreplay necessarily, but when the wine flows, the lighting's soft and the jokes are a little too well timed, you're carrying an ancient tradition forward. Even the taboo lives on. Forbidden office flings, secret longings, romantic triangles, all of it flavoured by the same thrill Roman lovers once felt, dodging jealous husbands and prying slave servants. The stakes have changed, but not the story. And let's not forget language. Latin phrases still haunt modern love letters. Carpe diem, amor vincit omnia, veni, vidi, vici, sometimes used with more enthusiasm than understanding. Even modern wedding vows borrow their gravity from Roman legal oaths. You might not call your partner domina, but you do still whisper promises under your breath, hoping they sound like poetry. Historians still debate just how much Roman foreplay really resembles our modern ways, or if we're just projecting back a rosier, sexier past. But then again, maybe we aren't giving ourselves enough credit, or them. Maybe the bridge between centuries isn't just stone ruins and archived scrolls, but that universal, unshakable feeling, wanting to be wanted. So yes, we've kept the words, the rhythms, even the awkwardness. The texts survive, the gestures echo. But the real inheritance? That sigh before the kiss, that teasing glance over the rim of a wine glass, that pause, just long enough for your heart to jump. And now, as the weight of the night settles, it's time to dim everything. Your breath slows. The world you just wandered, the perfumes, the poems, the whispered invitations folded into silk, melts into candle smoke and dust. The chatter of Roman salons, the splashing of garden fountains, the rustle of stolen love letters, all fade now to a soft, velvety hush. You feel the weight of your limbs warm and still beneath your blanket. Outside your window, the night stretches long and dark and comforting, like the draped folds of a toga slipping off one shoulder. Even the gods of love and longing seem quieter now, their torches dimmed to a flicker, content to let the silence take over. You've followed the curve of desire from the crowded forums to the edges of empire, from cheeky verses to medicinal theories, and back again to your own heartbeat, steady and slow. The Romans, loud, theatrical, impulsive, still manage to understand what matters most. The way anticipation swells in stillness, how longing can be as gentle as a sigh. So let all of it soften. Let your mind blur the lines between marble and moonlight. Let your breathing match the rhythm of waves against some far-off Roman shore. You've earned your rest. Tomorrow there will be new stories, new poems, maybe even new kisses. But for now, for this one quiet moment in the dark, you are history's beloved. Good night, traveller.